In January 2020, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle drafted a statement that ended their careers as working members of the British royal family. They published it without advance warning to the palace's communications office, which learned about it the same moment the rest of the world did, through a post on their official Instagram account. The palace's communications operation had not been consulted. It had not been prepared. It found out alongside the journalists it usually briefed. The media response was instantaneous. The tabloids named it Mexit within hours. That name did something subtle but consequential. It answered the question of cause before anyone had seriously asked it. Meghan was the variable. Meghan was the explanation. Harry was a man acted upon, not a man who had arrived at this point through a long and specific internal journey that predated her by decades. That framing had just enough truth in it to stick. Meghan's experience inside the institution and her treatment by the British press is documented and real. In their March 2021 Oprah Winfrey interview, Harry cited on camera a lack of support from the royal family as a primary reason for leaving. He described the palace press machinery as something that had been turned against his family rather than deployed to protect it. He named it clearly. He was precise. But here is the question the Mexit framing never properly answered. Where did Harry get the vocabulary for any of that? The specific framework through which he interpreted the institution's behavior, the conviction that the Crown's interests and the individual's interests were structurally opposed, that the machinery served the institution over the people inside it, that staying was incompatible with survival. That framework didn't arrive with Meghan. It wasn't assembled between 2016 and 2019. It was built in Kensington Palace in the 1990s, in private conversations and a published book and a live television interview watched by 17 million people. Diana wanted Harry to understand exactly what the palace was. The problem, as it turned out, was that he believed her. Sometime around 1996, Diana invited Jeremy Paxman to Kensington Palace for lunch. She was 34 or 35. Her divorce from Charles had been finalized in August of that year. The settlement had stripped her of the title HRH, Her Royal Highness, and her standing inside the institution was being systematically reduced, which she understood perfectly. Her position as an official working royal was being ended by the very structure she'd spent 15 years inside. At this lunch, she talked about her sons. William, she told Paxman, frequently said he didn't want to be king. Not vaguely, not once in a vulnerable teenage moment. He said it consistently, with something she read as genuine conviction. The weight of the expectation, the nature of the role, wasn't what he wanted. Harry, who was 11 or 12, had an answer ready every single time his brother said it. Paxman relayed this exchange in multiple documentary contexts, consistently and without significant variation across his various accounts. Harry would say, "If you don't want the job, I'll have it." Diana didn't correct him. That detail, the absence of correction, carries more weight than it first appears. Diana understood primogeniture. She had lived inside the institution for 15 years. She knew precisely what the constitutional rules governing succession required, and she knew Harry was second in line, then third, then further back as Charles's grandchildren were born. A mother who thought Harry was entertaining a harmless fantasy would redirect him toward constitutional reality. That is the obvious, responsible maternal move. Diana made no such move. By every account of that lunch, she was relaying the exchange to Paxman with something closer to satisfaction than concern. Her younger son's eagerness wasn't a problem she wanted to manage. It was, in her private understanding, a sign of something she had been noticing for years. Royal biographer Robert Jobson, speaking in the Channel 5 documentary William and Harry, Princes at War, put a name to that private understanding. According to Jobson, Diana reportedly gave Harry a nickname, GKH, standing for Good King Harry, because she thought he'd probably be better equipped for the role in the future than William. Jobson is a veteran royal correspondent with more than 35 years covering the family, the author of multiple books on the Windsors, and not a man given to casual confabulation. But the nickname rests on his account alone. No contemporaneous letter, no diary entry, nothing in Diana's own published words or in Andrew Morton's recordings independently confirms she used it. It's his testimony, and his testimony only. What makes the account credible, not certain, but credible, is that it fits precisely with what Paxman documented entirely separately. Two independent sources, approaching the same question from different angles, arrive at the same underlying conclusion. Diana privately believed Harry might be better suited to the throne than the constitutional heir, and she wasn't suppressing that belief in the presence of journalists she trusted. There is also one specific detail in the nickname that rewards examination. Harry is a nickname. His registered birth name, filed on September 15, 1984, when he was born at St. Mary's Hospital, Paddington, is Henry Charles Albert David. He has gone by Harry his entire public life, but the name his mother gave him is Henry. And Good King Harry isn't a phrase Diana invented fresh. It carries a specific historical echo. Henry V, who ascended to the English throne in 1413, fought the Battle of Agincourt in October 1415 and became the template for what a warrior king looked like. Shakespeare built an entire play around him, and the play calls him Harry throughout. This Harry whom they all admire. Henry V was Good King Harry, Harry Wales, whose birth certificate reads Henry, carries both of those names simultaneously, and has used neither his formal one publicly. Whether Diana consciously invoked the medieval comparison, we can't document. She never said so in any surviving source, but the echo is structural, built into the name itself. She wasn't inventing a title. She was activating one that already existed, attached to the name she had given him at birth. She was calling him king by the name on his birth certificate. Diana's belief in Harry wasn't simply maternal warmth directed at the less burdened child. It was a specific comparative assessment, privately stated to multiple journalists who subsequently documented it, based on her observation of her sons over years. She thought Harry's emotional directness, his natural ease with strangers across different circumstances, his openness, were precisely the qualities the role required for the era she was watching arrive. She thought William's quieter, more internally cautious temperament was, in her private reading, a liability for a role that demanded visible confidence and warmth at scale. Her 1995 Panorama interview is the clearest window into how she expressed this publicly. When Martin Bashir asked about William's fitness for kingship, Diana answered, "Well, then you have to see that William's very young at the moment. So do you want a burden like that to be put on his shoulders at such an age?" So I can't answer that question. 17 million people watched that interview live on BBC One. She called the throne a burden. She declined to confirm, on national television, that her 13-year-old firstborn, the constitutional heir to the British monarchy, was suited for it. That isn't an offhand remark made under pressure. It's a considered statement from a woman who had spent 15 years inside the institution and formed specific views about what it cost the people who held its central role. Richard Kay, a veteran Daily Mail royal journalist and one of Diana's closest personal friends, widely documented as one of the last people she telephoned on the night of August 30th, 1997, has said in subsequent accounts that Diana was working, in his understanding, to prepare for the possibility that Harry might succeed his father. His reported characterization of her thinking was consistent. She believed William had never really wanted the top job, and she took Harry's eagerness for it seriously, rather than dismissing it as a child's fantasy. What Diana was doing, in the space between what the institution had decided and what she privately imagined, was building something specific in Harry. An identity. A self-image that extended beyond the constitutional role he had been assigned. A young man who grows up genuinely believing he could lead, because the person who knew him most intimately told him so, and showed no inclination to correct the belief, does not quietly inhabit a subordinate, supporting role without internal friction. He measures the role against the self-image. He compares what he was told he could be against what the institution permits him to be. And when the gap between those two things becomes unbearable over enough time and enough specific provocation, he either finds a way to close it or he leaves. Diana's second gift to Harry was considerably more complicated, and she didn't deliver it quietly. She delivered it into the public record. In 1991 and 1992, she sat inside Kensington Palace and recorded hours of private testimony with Andrew Morton, who was writing what became Diana, Her True Story, published in June 1992. Morton's publisher's note is unambiguous. The following words are selected and edited from extensive taped interviews given by Diana, Princess of Wales, in 1991 to 1992 to Andrew Morton. She participated in her own voice. The book documented her eating disorder, her isolation, the experience of being a person whose individual well-being was systematically subordinated to the institution's image management. She described the palace's administrative apparatus, the courtiers who managed the crown's interests rather than the people inside it, as the men in gray. The phrase appears in Morton's text as her language, her term for the people she believed had worked against her. Harry was 7 going on 8 when that book was published. He wasn't born into a family where books like that went unread. As he grew into adolescence, the knowledge Diana had published was available to him, not as secret family history, but as a best-selling biography that had, by the time he was a teenager, become foundational to how Britain understood the recent history of its own royal family. He could read it. Eventually, he did. 3 years after the Morton book, she sat across from Martin Bashir, filmed for what became the Panorama interview that aired November 20, 1995. 17 million people watched it live. She discussed her marriage, her battles with the institution, the experience of being treated as a liability rather than an asset by the palace's professional apparatus, and her sense that she had been deliberately undermined by people whose primary loyalty was to the crown's continuity rather than to her. She said she wouldn't go quietly. She said she wanted to be a queen in people's hearts, even without the formal title. She described the palace as an environment that had made her feel consistently, systematically, alone. Harry was 11 years old when Panorama aired. William was 13. These weren't abstract historical programs about people they didn't know. This was their mother, on the most watched interview in British television history, describing the institution they lived inside as something that had tried to destroy her. They watched it knowing she was describing their home. Alongside the books and the television interviews, Diana was working at a different register entirely. In April 1987, she opened the UK's first HIV/AIDS unit at Middlesex Hospital. Walking through the ward, shaking hands with patients without gloves, photographed in direct physical contact with people the rest of the Western world was treating as untouchable. She said publicly, "HIV does not make people dangerous to know, so you can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it." Harry was 2 years old. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, she continued visiting AIDS wards and hospices in New York, Toronto, Sao Paulo, as official solo engagements documented by press pools. These weren't visits she took her sons on, but they were visible. Her sons grew up watching what their mother chose to do with the visibility the crown gave her. The homeless shelter visits were different in character. Those were parenting decisions, not official engagements. Diana was patron of Centerpoint, the London charity working with young homeless people, and in 1996, she brought both Harry and William with her on a visit. Harry was 11. William was 14. In October 2024, William confirmed this publicly, telling Reuters that the visit had been an eye-opener. The future Prince of Wales, the man who will be king, described his dead mother taking him to meet young people with nowhere to sleep, and said the experience altered something in how he understood the world. Diana's stated philosophy, documented consistently across people who knew her, was that her sons needed to grow up understanding what the world looked like when the palace walls weren't there. She wanted them grounded. She wanted them to know that the institution's privilege wasn't universal, and that ordinary suffering existed, was real, and had weight. Both sons absorbed that lesson. William has continued Diana's Centrepoint patronage himself into his adult years. Harry's commitments, his charity work in Africa, his focus on veterans' mental health, and the Invictus Games, show the same inherited instinct. Look directly at suffering. Don't look past it. But Diana wasn't only teaching her sons compassion. She was teaching them, simultaneously, that the institution wasn't the whole of the world, and that the world outside its walls was more urgently real than the rituals and protocols inside. The humanitarian education and the published institutional critique arrived together, in the same childhood. Take both. A child taught that the world is bigger than the palace, and that the palace is smaller and more self-serving than it claims to be, and who is also being told, privately, that he has the qualities of a king. That isn't a psychologically stable combination. That is a paradox waiting to become unbearable. Harry's birth was registered under the name Henry Charles Albert David. His mother called him Harry. His brother, in the intimacy of family argument, called him Harold. 3 names for the same man, none of them king. The institution had a name for him too, the Spare. Second in line at birth, third after his grandfather died. The constitutional function of the Spare is unambiguous. Exist, be healthy, be ready. Harry understood this clearly enough that he titled his 2023 memoir with the single word, and opened it by writing, "The Heir and the Spare." There was no judgment about it, but also no ambiguity. I was the shadow, the support, the plan B. I was brought into the world in case something happened to Willie. I was summoned to provide backup, distraction, diversion, and, if necessary, a spare part. The shadow. The spare part. This is a man who was reportedly nicknamed Good King Harry by his mother, writing about himself in industrial terminology. The distance between those two self-conceptions isn't rhetorical flourish. It's the operational wound the memoir spends its full 300 pages circling without closing. He describes how he understood his own birth. His father reportedly said upon Harry arriving, "Wonderful. Now you've given me an heir and a spare. My work is done." This is Harry's recollection of what his mother told him his father said. It's one source, 2 layers removed from the event, relayed by a man who knew his memory was shaped by decades of grief. He says explicitly in the memoir, "Whatever the cause, my memory is my memory. It does what it does." But what matters about a founding story isn't its literal verifiability. What matters is that the child grew up believing it, and that it shaped the framework inside which he understood his own existence. Diana was simultaneously giving Harry 2 accounts of himself that couldn't both be true. One said, "You have the temperament, you have the gifts, your brother doesn't want this, and you do. And I see something in you the institution will miss." The other said, "You are constitutionally the backup. You exist to serve, to stand ready, to make way." No child builds a stable identity from those 2 messages at once. One of them has to be wrong. And the person best placed to help Harry figure out which one was his mother, who died in Paris when he was 12 years old. In the early hours of August 31st, 1997, a car traveling through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris crashed at high speed. Diana was in the car. She died at Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital in the hours before dawn. She was 36 years old. Prince Charles flew to Paris personally to accompany her body home, returning to Balmoral where William and Harry were with the Queen. He woke Harry, who was 12 years old, a month from his 13th birthday, and told him his mother was dead. Harry didn't cry. He wept at Diana's funeral. He wept at the burial. He didn't cry again for 17 years. He has said this himself, consistently and across multiple accounts. The grief wasn't absent. It was sealed in a place he couldn't reach, or wouldn't reach. By his own subsequent account, he refused for years to accept the factual reality of her death. He told himself she might be alive somewhere, living quietly, having escaped a life that had been trying to destroy her. He sought a woman who reportedly claimed she had powers to communicate with the deceased, looking for some kind of continuation of the conversation Diana had never finished. He sought restricted police photographs of the Paris crash, examining images that he hoped would give him evidence he could no longer argue with. The search for proof of her death was itself the measure of how thoroughly he had refused to process it. "My war didn't begin in Afghanistan," he wrote in spare. "It began in August 1997. He isn't being rhetorical. He served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, a 10-week deployment as a forward air controller in 2007 to 2008, cut short when the press broke a media blackout agreement, and a second deployment in 2012 to 2013. He killed people in Afghanistan and wrote about it in spare with a directness that distinguished the memoir from every previous royal autobiography. He is ranking all of that against the morning his father woke him at Balmoral and telling you the mother's death was the harder war. Diana died when Harry was 12. The conversations she had with him about his capability, about the institution, about William's reluctance and Harry's potential, about what the Crown asked of the people inside it, were delivered to a child, and the person who might have updated them as he grew, who might have added nuance and context and the adult qualifications any honest person would eventually add to assessments made in the heat of a private battle, was killed in Paris before Harry started secondary school. The messages were sealed in place by her death. For 17 years, he didn't cry. He also didn't update. Look at what happened to William over the same period, because William is where the argument sharpens. He heard the same conversations. He was at the same Centerpoint shelter. He watched his parents' marriage collapse from 3 years closer to adulthood than Harry was, 15 when Diana died, compared to Harry's 12. He told his mother repeatedly that he didn't want to be king. And then she died. And in the decades that followed, William became something that his mother's private assessment had not quite anticipated. He went to Eton, then St. Andrews, where he met Kate Middleton. He commissioned at Sandhurst in December 2006. He built his public profile with the deliberate patience of a man who had decided the role required long-term credibility above short-term visibility. By his mid-30s, royal observers weren't discussing his reluctance. They were describing his future plans, a considered, substantive engagement with what a 21st-century monarchy needed to look like. In October 2024, speaking at an event connected to his Homewards Homelessness Initiative, William confirmed publicly that Diana had taken him to a homeless shelter as a child. He described it to Reuters as an eye-opener. He has continued Diana's patronage of Centerpoint into his adult years. He absorbed what his mother taught him about the world beyond palace walls and integrated it into his understanding of what the role required, rather than using it as evidence that the role was incompatible with a life worth living. The boy who told his mother he didn't want the job is the man preparing most seriously to do it. Diana had worried about William. She had described the throne as a potential burden his shoulders might not be ready to carry. She had, on live television, declined to confirm his fitness. The most plausible psychological reading is that William, having internalized his mother's doubt, spent the decades after her death proving it wrong. Not consciously, not as a formal project, but as the ordinary process by which a child who has been found wanting finds something to answer. He hardened. The institution got the committed heir it needed, and the spare, who had been given the private name of a warrior king, got the institutional framework that confirmed everything his mother had told him, and left. Spare was published on January 8, 2023. It sold 1.4 million copies in the United Kingdom and United States on its first day, the fastest-selling nonfiction debut in UK publishing history at that point. Harry had worked on it with the writer J.R. Mooringer over many months. The first thing you encounter, before Harry's own voice, is a William Faulkner epigraph. The past is never dead. It's not even past. He chose this deliberately. A memoir about his present life and his reasons for departing a modern institution opens with a line about the impossibility of escaping history. The New Yorker's review, titled "The Haunting of Prince Harry," described Diana as another spectral figure haunting the text, present throughout in the grief and the institutional anger and the sense of unfinished business, but absent from most of the narrative's main action because she died before it began. Harry's descriptions of his own psychological position inside the family are the memoir's most precisely rendered passages. On the structural function of his role, the heir and the spare, there was no judgment about it, but also no ambiguity. I was the shadow, the support, the plan B. I was brought into the world in case something happened to Willie. I was summoned to provide backup, distraction, diversion, and, if necessary, a spare part. On William. In some ways, he was my mirror. In some ways, he was my opposite. My beloved brother, my arch-nemesis. How had that happened? He doesn't answer it directly. The question appears in different forms throughout the memoir and is never quite resolved. How did the beloved brother become the arch-nemesis? Harry documents specific incidents, a physical altercation in the kitchen of his cottage at Kensington Palace that he describes in visceral detail. Multiple instances where he felt William sided with the institution over him. The communication failures that accumulated for years before the final break. But underneath those specific incidents is a structural truth he never quite names. Two brothers, given the same mother, the same foundation, the same dead parent, and then divided by the institution's logic into positions that made genuine equality structurally impossible. One was the future, the other was the backup. That division shapes everything that falls inside it, regardless of the specific events. The brothers' private names for each other appear in the memoir's most intimate passages. William calls Harry Harold. Harry calls William Willie. The name Harold belongs to no English king of any particular standing. It's, in the context of British royal history, associated most famously with the last Anglo-Saxon king, defeated at Hastings in 1066, the man who lost. Harry's legal name is Henry, the name of warrior kings. His public name is Harry. His brother's name for him in their most private exchanges is Harold, the name of the man who lost the kingdom. Three names: the medieval king, the spare, the man his brother privately calls by the name of a defeated king. The layers of identity embedded in those three names are the archaeological record of a man who never had a settled self-concept inside the institution he was born into. Harry also describes his relationship to the monarchy in the most extreme terms he deploys anywhere in the book, questioning whether it functioned as a death cult, given the tombs filled with dead people and the hereditary succession. He frames the institution's relationship to individuals as consumption, the lineage continuing, the individuals cycling through, the institution permanent and the people inside it transient and replaceable. Diana had said something less extreme but structurally identical. The fairy tale is killing me. The institution requires its people to sacrifice their authentic selves for its continuity. Mother and son arrive at the same structural diagnosis through different language and different decades, describing the same machine from the inside. Between 1997 and 2020, Harry functioned as a working royal with genuine competence and, at certain points, distinction. He completed his A-levels at Eton. He attended Sandhurst Military Academy, commissioning as a second lieutenant in the Blues and Royals in April 2006. He deployed to Afghanistan twice, the first deployment in 2007 to 2008 as a forward air controller, cut short after 10 weeks when an Australian magazine and then the Drudge Report broke the media blackout that had allowed him to serve without becoming a target, and a second deployment in 2012 to 2013. By his own account in Spare, he killed people in those operations and wrote about it with a directness that distinguished his memoir from anything any working royal had previously published. For much of his 20s, he was arguably the most genuinely popular member of the royal family. The tabloids loved him when he was wild. The Las Vegas photographs in August 2012, the Nazi uniform at a costume party in January 2005 that earned him a public dressing down and a formal apology, and rehabilitated him quickly each time he turned up in uniform. He was the accessible one, the real one, the one who seemed to have something underneath the performance. The grief was still sealed under all of this. In 2014, his then-girlfriend Cressida Bonas asked him about Diana. He broke down completely. He was 29 years old, and a quiet question from someone who cared about him undid him in an instant. He had not seen a therapist. He had not processed the August 1997 death in any formal way across 17 years of adult public life. His own accounts describe drinking heavily in his teenage years and using cocaine, which he has stated publicly himself. Pressure valves rather than resolution, ways of managing a grief that had nowhere to go. His first serious therapeutic work began in 2016, when his relationship with Meghan Markle started. She pushed him toward help, by his own account. He was 31. The therapy revealed, or at least what Harry subsequently described it revealing, that the grief and his institutional context weren't separable. He wasn't mourning a dead mother in isolation from the institution where she had suffered. The grief was entangled with a specific place, a specific set of people, a specific documented pattern of behavior that he had watched destroy her, and that he was still, daily, living inside. When specific events between 2018 and 2019 escalated, documented in Spare as particular instances of palace communications decisions made at the Sussexes' expense, specific internal choices where the institution's image interests were prioritized over Harry and Meghan's well-being, Harry had an interpretive framework already in place. He had seen this before. Not in his own earlier life. In his mother's published account, written in 1991 and 1992, available in print from the year he turned 8. The institution confirmed what Diana had documented. The machinery operated the way she said it operated. He had believed her in the abstract. Now the specifics were arriving in real time. Diana's documented grievances, reserved in Morton's 1992 biography and in the Panorama broadcast, center on three structural problems: the absence of genuine institutional support for the individuals inside it, the palace's communications machinery being used against individuals rather than for them, and the press as something the institution managed strategically to protect the crown's interests at a person's expense. Harry's stated reasons for leaving, as expressed in the Oprah interview in March 2021 and elaborated throughout Spare, sit in exactly those three categories. He cited a lack of support from the royal family as a primary reason for departing. He described the palace's press operation as something that had been turned against Meghan rather than around her. He described an institution where the individuals inside it were subordinated to its image management needs. The language isn't identical across 30 years, but the structural diagnosis is the same diagnosis, applied to the same institution. An academic analysis produced at the University of Barcelona, studying the parallel, described the Harry and Meghan crisis as echoing the treatment Diana once experienced within the same institutional environment. The same machine, running consistent operating priorities across successive generations, produced recognizably similar outcomes for a mother in 1991 and her son in 2019. This isn't surprising if the institution's core logic is consistent, which Diana had documented in precise detail and which Morton had published, and which Harry had grown up with access to. He didn't need Diana to have whispered these mechanisms to him privately as a child. She had published them. She had broadcast them to 17 million people. And when his own experience began to resemble, not in detail but in shape, in structural pattern, what she had described, the framework he carried told him immediately what he was looking at. The framework said, "This is what this institution does." The framework proved accurate. And beneath the institutional warning, persistent and harder to name, was the second piece of what Diana had left him, the private belief that he was capable of more than the institution had allocated him, that he had the temperament, the gifts, the genuine public qualities the role required. The institution had confirmed the warning. It couldn't honor the identity. There was no longer a functional reason to stay. William received the same upbringing, the same homeless shelter, the same dead mother, the same institution, the same press, the same palace machinery. He adapted. He is preparing with visible seriousness for succession. If Diana's dual messaging produced Harry's exit, the same logic should have produced the same result in both brothers. It didn't. The most precise answer is that the messages weren't actually identical for both sons. Diana worried about William. She expressed that worry publicly on television to 17 million people, declining to confirm his fitness for the throne. The message William received from his mother was something closer to parental anxiety than parental belief. He had something to prove. What Harry received was different, genuine, expressed confidence, belief rather than concern. Those are different psychological anchors to carry into the same institution, and they produce different trajectories. A second answer. Diana's worldview was a predisposition, not a cause. The specific incidents that triggered the 2020 departure, the particular instances documented in Spare of palace decisions made at Harry and Meghan's expense, were the immediate cause. The predisposition explains how he read those incidents and why his interpretive framework led him toward exit rather than endurance. Both things are required for the full account. A third. Grief may be carrying more explanatory weight than any ideology Diana transmitted. Harry spent 23 years sealed away from her death. When it finally broke open in the therapeutic work that began in 2016, the break wasn't simply grief for his mother. It was grief entangled with the institution where she had suffered, expressed through the language she had left him for naming that institution. grief that couldn't separate the woman he had lost from the environment in which she was lost. Untreated and sealed for 2 decades, that grief didn't stay inert. It accumulated. It found the edges of the structure it was stored inside. All 3 readings are compatible. They layer on top of each other. The full story requires all of them. Diana told Harry the truth about the palace. She told it in private conversations, letting his eagerness run without correction, while Paxman and Jobson and Kay watched and later documented what she hadn't corrected. She told it in a book she participated in creating when he was 8 years old, setting down her battles with the institutional machinery in detail that anyone who read it would carry. She told it on national television to 17 million people when he was 11, calling the throne a burden and declining to confirm her own firstborn's fitness for it. She told it by taking him to a homeless shelter in 1996 and showing him a world the palace walls kept at a careful distance. She named him Henry and reportedly called him Good King Harry, giving him the epithet of a warrior king in private, while the institution's filing system classified him as spare. The cruelest dimension of the timing is that she died before Harry was old enough to hold any of it with adult hands. He was 12. A child receives the messages available to him as a child receives everything, complete, unqualified, without the perspective that grows only through time and experience and the kind of conversation Diana died before she could have with him. The king's self-image and the dissident's worldview arrived simultaneously, delivered by the person he trusted most in the world, sealed in place by her death at 36, and left unopened in any therapeutic sense for 17 years. He didn't cry again for 17 years. He also didn't revise. He left the royal family in January 2020 for reasons that include Meghan's experience and specific documented institutional decisions. Those reasons are real and proximate. But the framework inside which he understood those reasons, the vocabulary he used to name what was wrong, the internal permission to walk away from something every generation of his family had treated as immovable, that was assembled in Kensington Palace in the 1990s. The institution confirmed what Diana had documented. The confirmation activated a framework she had built in a boy she believed was capable of leading. And the combination of those 2 things produced a conclusion the institution had no mechanism to prevent. He didn't become king. He became something the crown hadn't anticipated. A man who understood, with unusual and specific clarity, what staying inside it would cost, and who had been told, by the person who knew him best, that the cost was too high. She told him the truth to protect him. She gave him a king's identity because she genuinely saw it in him. Those 2 gifts were irreconcilable inside the institution as it actually operated, and nobody who gave them to him lived long enough to help him hold them both. He did the only thing left. He fulfilled the private prophecy she'd left him, in the one direction the institution would allow. Subscribe for more stories like this.